The world knew him as a man who controlled everything. But that night, the most powerful man in the city whispered the one thing he was afraid to lose: himself. Ethan Park had spent decades building an image that nobody dared question. To the outside world, he was a Korean mafia boss whose name represented influence, discipline, and power. He lived in a private mansion overlooking the city lights of New York, surrounded by luxury, security, and people who followed his decisions without hesitation. Every room in his home carried signs of success. The expensive furniture, the carefully arranged artwork, the quiet respect from everyone around him. It was the life many people dreamed of. But behind the walls of that mansion, Ethan Park was facing a battle nobody could see. The man who once walked through every room with confidence now sat quietly near the window, watching the city move without him. The rain tapped softly against the glass, creating a rhythm that filled the silence around him. Months earlier, Ethan had been known for his ability to solve problems, protect his interests, and remain calm under pressure. People saw him as someone who could never be shaken. But life had changed in a way he never expected. His world became smaller. Simple moments became difficult. The independence he had always valued became something he had to rethink every day. And the hardest part was not the change itself. The hardest part was the way he saw himself after it happened. Ethan looked at the reflection in the window and quietly said, "I am still a man." The words were barely louder than a whisper, but they carried years of hidden emotions. He was not speaking about power. He was not speaking about reputation. He was speaking about dignity. Behind him, Naomi Williams heard those words. She was his wife, a Nigerian woman whose warmth and strength had always been different from the world Ethan came from. Naomi was not impressed by his name or his influence. She never loved him because he was powerful. She loved the person she discovered beneath that image. The man who listened when nobody was watching. The man who cared more than he admitted. The man who carried responsibility even when it became heavy. When Naomi saw Ethan sitting there alone, she felt something she had never expected. She saw not a feared figure, not a man surrounded by status, but the person she promised to stand beside. Her eyes filled with tears because she finally understood the depth of what he had been hiding. Ethan had spent his entire life proving that he was strong. But now, he needed someone to remind him that being vulnerable did not make him less valuable. Naomi walked closer and gently said his name. Ethan looked up, surprised that she was still there. In that quiet moment, something changed between them. The distance created by fear, pride, and pain began to disappear. Because sometimes the strongest love is not the love that celebrates someone at their highest point. It is the love that stays when they are struggling to remember their own worth. And that night, inside a mansion built on power, a woman from a different world showed a powerful man something he had forgotten. His value was never defined by what he had lost. It was defined by the person he still was. Before Ethan Park became the man everyone feared, he was simply a young man who believed strength meant never needing anyone. Long before the quiet nights inside his mansion, before the moments when he questioned his own identity, Ethan built his entire life around control. He believed that if he stayed focused, if he stayed disciplined, and if he never showed uncertainty, nothing could ever take away what he had created. In the heart of New York, his name carried influence. Business partners respected him, strangers recognized his presence, and people around him carefully measured every word they spoke. But behind the carefully built image was a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as more than his reputation. Ethan grew up learning that emotions were weaknesses. Every decision had to be calculated. Every expression had to remain calm. He became someone who could walk into any room and command attention without saying much. The world saw confidence. They saw success. They saw a man who had everything. But Naomi Williams saw something different from the beginning. When she first entered Ethan's life, she noticed the small details that others ignored. She noticed how he quietly helped people without expecting recognition. She noticed how he remembered the names of employees who had worked around him for years. She noticed that beneath his serious expression was a person who carried more compassion than he wanted anyone to know. Naomi came from a completely different world. Her Nigerian heritage shaped her belief in family, connection, and emotional honesty. She was raised to understand that a person's true character appeared not when everything was easy, but when life became difficult. To her, Love was not about standing beside someone only during moments of success. Love was about staying present when someone needed understanding the most. At first, Ethan did not know how to accept that kind of care. He was used to people approaching him because of what he represented. Naomi approached him because of who he was. That difference changed everything. She did not treat him like a powerful figure who needed to be admired. She treated him like a human being who deserved to be understood. As their relationship grew, Ethan slowly discovered something he had never expected. The woman who seemed to come from a completely different world was the person who understood him better than anyone else. She challenged the walls he had built around himself without trying to break them down. She simply showed him that he did not need to hide behind them forever. But after the change in his life, those old fears returned stronger than ever. Ethan wondered if Naomi would still see the same person she once loved. He wondered if the man behind the reputation was enough. And while he struggled with those questions in silence, Naomi continued to stand beside him, knowing that the greatest battles were sometimes the ones nobody else could see. Because the day Ethan lost the image of being unstoppable was the day he finally had the chance to discover who he truly was. Naomi Williams always understood that the quiet moments revealed the truth about a person. In a world where people often judged Ethan Park by his reputation, she looked beyond the name, the influence, and the carefully controlled image. She saw the man who sat alone after long days, the man who carried responsibilities without complaint, and the man who struggled to admit when something hurt him. After Ethan's life changed, those quiet moments became more frequent. The mansion that once felt like a symbol of success began to feel different. The wide hallways seemed longer. The rooms that once hosted important conversations became filled with silence. Ethan noticed the difference, and so did Naomi. But while Ethan focused on what he believed he had lost, Naomi focused on what remained. She remembered the small moments that defined him before the world saw him as untouchable. She remembered how he would stop during busy mornings to ask employees about their families. She remembered how he quietly supported people who had nowhere else to turn. Those moments never appeared in newspapers or business reports. They were not part of the image people created of Ethan Park, but they were the moments that showed who he truly was. One afternoon, Naomi found Ethan looking through old photographs in his office. The sunlight from the large windows reflected across the room, creating a peaceful atmosphere that felt completely different from the pressure surrounding his life. In his hands were memories of a time when he moved through the world without hesitation. Naomi watched him carefully and realized that Ethan was not grieving only the changes around him. He was grieving the version of himself he thought he had lost forever. "You keep looking at the person you used to be," Naomi said softly. Ethan looked toward her, surprised by how easily she understood what he could not explain. "Because that person was stronger," he replied. Naomi walked closer and shook her head gently. "That person was only one part of you." Her words stayed in the room long after she said them. Ethan had spent years believing strength came from being independent, from never needing support, and from always appearing confident. Naomi showed him another kind of strength, the strength to accept change, the strength to allow someone else to stand beside him, the strength to understand that dignity was not something taken away by difficult circumstances. It was something carried within. Their marriage had brought together two different worlds. Ethan came from a life built around power and control. Naomi came from a life built around family and emotional connection. At first, those differences created challenges. But over time, those differences became the reason they understood each other. She taught him patience. He taught her determination. Together, they discovered that love was not about finding someone who had a perfect life. It was about choosing someone even when life became complicated. That evening, Ethan looked out at the city lights once again. The same view that once reminded him of everything that had changed now felt different. For the first time in months, he wondered if his story was not ending. Maybe it was simply becoming something new. And beside him stood the one person who never measured him by what he could do, but by who he had always been. For most of his life, Ethan Park believed that people respected him because of what he had built. The businesses, the influence, the reputation, and the authority that surrounded his name all created an image of a man who could handle anything. But after his life changed, Ethan discovered something painful. Many people admired the version of him that represented success, but very few truly understood the person behind that image. Naomi Williams noticed that difference more than anyone. She saw the moments when Ethan became quiet. She saw the way he looked away when conversations turned toward his future. She saw the man who wanted to remain strong but did not know how to accept the changes happening around him. One evening, the two of them sat together in the living room of their New York home. The room was warm, filled with soft lights and the sound of rain outside the windows. It was a simple moment, but for Ethan, simple moments had become the hardest to accept. "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" Naomi asked gently. Ethan remained silent for a few seconds. He looked toward the city outside and thought about the years when every decision came easily. He remembered walking into meetings with confidence, solving problems without hesitation, and believing that nothing could truly change him. "Every day," he finally answered. Naomi listened carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not try to immediately fix his feelings. She understood that sometimes people needed to be heard before they could begin healing. "I think you are looking at the wrong thing," she said softly. Ethan turned toward her. "What do you mean?" Naomi smiled slightly. "You keep remembering what you lost, but you forget what you still have." Those words stayed with Ethan. For years, he had measured his value through what he could accomplish. He believed his ability to protect, provide, and lead was what made him worthy. But Naomi showed him that his worth existed before any title, before any achievement, and before anyone recognized his name. Their relationship had never been simple. They came from different backgrounds, different cultures, and different experiences. Ethan was raised in a world where emotions were carefully hidden. Naomi was raised in a family where love was expressed through presence, honesty, and support. They did not always understand each other immediately, but they always tried. That effort became the foundation of their bond. While others saw Ethan as a powerful figure who had everything, Naomi saw a person who had spent years carrying responsibilities alone. She knew that behind his serious expression was someone who wanted to be accepted without needing to prove himself. Slowly, Ethan began allowing himself to trust the love around him. He started having conversations he once avoided. He started sharing thoughts he had kept hidden. Small changes appeared, but they mattered. The man who once believed he had to carry everything alone began to understand that accepting support was not a weakness. It was a sign of strength. And as Naomi watched Ethan change, she realized something important. She had not fallen in love with the man everyone admired. She had fallen in love with the man nobody else took the time to see. The rain continued falling over New York that evening, creating a quiet atmosphere inside Ethan Park's home. The city outside remained busy and full of movement, but inside the mansion, everything felt still. Ethan sat near the window, watching the lights in the distance while thinking about a question he had avoided for months. If he could no longer be the man he used to be, who was he now? For years, Ethan believed his identity came from his ability to lead, to make decisions, and to protect everything around him. His confidence was built on action. His reputation was built on control. But now, he found himself facing moments where he had to depend on others, and that reality challenged everything he believed about himself. Naomi Williams noticed the silence before she noticed the sadness. She had learned to understand Ethan without needing many words. She knew when he was thinking too deeply. She knew when he was pretending everything was fine. She knew when the man everyone respected was struggling with thoughts he could not express. That night, Ethan finally allowed himself to say what had been hidden in his heart. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice quiet in the large room. "What if I am not the same person anymore?" Naomi looked at him with gentle eyes. She knew this was not a question about circumstances. It was a question about identity. Ethan was not asking about what he could do. He was asking if he was still worthy of being loved. "You think the person you were is the reason I stayed," Naomi replied. "But that is not true." Ethan looked at her, listening carefully. "I did not choose you because of your influence. I did not choose you because of your name. I chose you because of your heart." The room became silent. For a man who had spent his entire life hearing people talk about his achievements, those words felt different. Naomi was not reminding him of what he had accomplished. She was reminding him of who he had always been. She remembered the moments others never saw. The times Ethan quietly helped someone without asking for recognition. The moments when he showed patience even though nobody expected kindness from him. The small choices that revealed his character when no one was watching. Ethan lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of emotions he had kept hidden. "I thought being strong meant never needing anyone," he admitted. Naomi gently answered, Sometimes strength means allowing someone to stand beside you. Those words changed something inside him. Ethan began to understand that his life had not become smaller because he needed support. It had simply become different. A person's value was never meant to depend on how much they could carry alone. It was also found in the connections they built and the love they accepted. In the weeks that followed, Naomi continued to remind Ethan of the person he was beyond his reputation. They spent mornings together, shared conversations that once felt impossible, and slowly rebuilt the confidence that had been hidden beneath his doubts. Ethan was still the same intelligent, determined man. But now, he was learning something he had never truly understood before. He did not have to prove his worth every single day, because the person who mattered most had already seen it all along. And in that quiet transformation, Ethan discovered that losing one version of himself did not mean losing himself completely. Sometimes, a person has to let go of who they thought they needed to be before they can finally become who they were meant to be. Months had passed since Ethan Park first admitted the fears he had kept hidden for so long. The world around him had not suddenly changed, but something inside him had. The mansion was still the same. The city lights outside his windows still shined every night. His name still carried influence and respect. But Ethan no longer looked at his life through the same eyes. He had started to understand that losing control over certain parts of life did not mean losing his value as a person. Naomi Williams saw the difference before anyone else did. She noticed the small changes that most people would have missed. Ethan smiled more often. He joined conversations instead of watching from a distance. He allowed himself to accept help without feeling like he had failed. These moments seemed simple, but for someone who spent years believing he always had to be the strongest person in the room, they meant everything. One morning, Naomi found Ethan sitting in the garden behind their home. The sunlight covered the trees, and the quiet sound of nature created a peaceful contrast to the busy city nearby. She sat beside him, and for a while, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Their silence had become comfortable, something Ethan had rarely experienced before. "You know what I admire most about you?" Naomi asked. Ethan looked at her with curiosity. "What?" She smiled. "You are finally learning that being human is not something you need to apologize for." Ethan looked away, thinking about her words. For years, he had believed people only respected strength. He thought showing uncertainty would make others see him differently. But Naomi had shown him another truth. The people who truly cared about him did not need him to be perfect. They only wanted him to be honest. That realization slowly changed the way Ethan viewed himself. He began reconnecting with people he had pushed away. He listened more. He opened conversations instead of ending them. He started using his influence not as a symbol of power, but as a way to create opportunities for others. Naomi watched this transformation with quiet pride. She knew she had not changed Ethan into someone new. She had simply helped him remember the person who had always been there. One afternoon, Ethan received a visit from people who had worked with him for years. They expected to see the same distant leader they remembered. Instead, they found a man who greeted them warmly and asked about their families before discussing business. It surprised them, but it also reminded them of something they had forgotten. The kindness they were seeing was not new. It had always been part of Ethan. It was just hidden behind years of responsibility and expectations. Later that evening, Ethan stood with Naomi near the city window. "I used to think people respected me because they feared losing my approval," he said quietly. "Now I realize the people who matter never needed anything from me except honesty." Naomi reached for his hand and smiled. In that moment, Ethan understood the greatest change was not what others thought about him. The greatest change was what he finally believed. About himself, he was not less of a man because life had changed his path. He was stronger because he learned that dignity could survive every difficult season. And beside him was the woman who never looked at what he had lost. She always saw what remained. The world outside Ethan Park's mansion began to notice a change that even Ethan himself could not ignore. For years, people had known him as a man surrounded by influence, someone whose decisions shaped the lives of those around him. They remembered the confident leader who entered every room with certainty. They remembered the person who seemed impossible to challenge. But now, those same people were beginning to see something they had never noticed before. They were seeing the man beneath the image. Naomi Williams had always believed that true character appeared in moments when nobody was trying to impress anyone. She saw Ethan during the quiet mornings, when he reflected on his future. She saw him during conversations where he admitted things he once kept hidden. She saw him becoming more open, not because he had become weaker, but because he finally understood that honesty required courage. One afternoon, Ethan attended a gathering with people who had worked alongside him for many years. It was the first time he had returned to a room filled with familiar faces after his life had changed. As he entered, he noticed the expressions around him. Some people looked uncertain. Some looked surprised. They were not sure how to approach the man they once knew. Ethan noticed their hesitation, but instead of retreating into silence, he greeted them warmly. He asked about their families. He listened to their stories. He showed a level of patience that many had never seen from him before. Naomi watched from a short distance, quietly smiling. She knew this moment was important. Ethan was not trying to prove anything. He was not trying to convince anyone that he was still valuable. He simply allowed people to see who he truly was. During the gathering, one of his longtime colleagues approached him and shared something unexpected. "You know, many people respected your strength," the man said. "But they always appreciated your kindness more than they realized." Ethan remained quiet for a moment. Those words stayed with him because they revealed something he had forgotten. His worth had never come only from his achievements. The respect he earned was not because of the image he created. It was because of the choices he made when nobody was watching. Later that evening, Ethan and Naomi walked through the garden behind their home. The air was cool, and the city lights created a peaceful glow around them. Ethan looked more comfortable than he had in months. "I spent so much time trying to prove I could handle everything alone," he said. "I never realized that accepting love was also a form of strength." Naomi smiled and looked at him with warmth. Sometimes the hardest thing for a strong person to do is allow themselves to be cared for. Ethan thought about how different his life felt now. He had not regained the exact life he once knew. Instead, he had discovered something more meaningful. He had found a deeper understanding of himself. The people around him no longer saw only the powerful figure from the past. They saw a husband, a friend, and a person who had learned that dignity was not connected to perfection. It was connected to the courage to continue moving forward. And as Naomi stood beside him, Ethan finally understood that the greatest transformation was not becoming the man he used to be. It was becoming the man he was always meant to become. The morning sunlight entered Ethan Park's home differently than it had before. The same large windows, the same quiet rooms, and the same view of New York remained unchanged, but Ethan no longer looked at them with the same feeling. What once reminded him of everything that had changed now reminded him of everything he still had. He had spent months believing that his greatest challenge was accepting a new reality. But slowly, he discovered that the real challenge was learning how to create a meaningful life within that reality. Naomi Williams saw that change every day. She noticed the way Ethan approached conversations with more patience. She noticed how he began to focus less on what he could no longer do and more on what he could still contribute. The man who once measured himself through control was beginning to measure himself through connection. One afternoon, Ethan received an invitation to visit a community organization that his family had supported for years. In the past, he would have handled such matters through meetings and reports. He would have listened from a distance and made decisions based on information provided to him. But this time, he wanted to experience it personally. Naomi joined him, standing beside him as they walked through the building filled with people from different backgrounds. Ethan listened to their stories, their hopes, and their challenges. He realized that his influence had always been more meaningful when it was used to help others. As he spoke with people there, something became clear. He had not lost his ability to make a difference. He had only needed to discover a new way to use it. Naomi watched as Ethan connected with people naturally. She saw the confidence returning to his eyes, but it was different from before. The old Ethan carried confidence because he believed he had to be untouchable. The new Ethan carried confidence because he understood he was valuable even when life was not perfect. Later that evening, they sat together in their home and reflected on the day. Ethan looked thoughtful as he spoke. "For so long, I thought my purpose came from being the person everyone depended on." Naomi listened quietly. "But maybe my purpose was never about proving I was strong," he continued. "Maybe it was about using whatever strength I have to make something better." Naomi smiled because she knew this was the moment she had been hoping for. Ethan was no longer trying to return to the person he was before. He was building a new identity based on wisdom, compassion, and acceptance. Their relationship had also grown stronger through everything they experienced. Naomi had shown Ethan that love was not about protecting someone from every difficult moment. It was about standing beside them while they found their own way forward. Ethan had shown Naomi that even people who appear powerful can carry unseen struggles and deserve understanding. Their worlds had been different from the beginning. Their experiences had shaped them in different ways. But together, they created something neither of them expected. A connection built not on status, appearance, or what they could offer each other, but on genuine respect. As the city lights appeared outside their window, Ethan looked at Naomi and realized something important. The life he once feared losing had opened the door to a life he never knew he needed. He had not returned to who he was before. He had become someone stronger, not because he controlled everything around him, but because he finally understood what truly mattered. Years later, Ethan Park would look back on that difficult chapter of his life and realize something he never expected. The moment he believed everything had been taken from him was actually the moment he discovered what truly mattered. The world had once measured him by his influence, his reputation, and the power attached to his name. But those things could never define the entire person. What defined Ethan was the way he continued moving forward, the way he learned to accept love, and the way he chose to use his life for something greater than himself. The mansion that once felt quiet and distant became a place filled with warmth. The rooms that once carried only the feeling of responsibility became places where memories were created. Naomi Williams noticed the transformation more than anyone. She remembered the nights when Ethan questioned his own worth. She remembered the moments when he struggled to believe he was still the same person. But she also remembered the first time she saw hope return to his eyes. It was not because his circumstances suddenly became easier. It was because he finally understood that his value had never depended on what life allowed him to do. It depended on the person he chose to be. Ethan continued supporting the community projects that had become important to him. He met with people, listened to their experiences, and used his knowledge to create opportunities for others. The same determination that once helped him build an empire was now guided by compassion and understanding. People who had known him for years began noticing the difference. They no longer saw only a powerful figure surrounded by success. They saw a man who had faced a difficult season and discovered a deeper kind of strength. One evening, Ethan and Naomi stood together on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of New York stretched endlessly into the distance, just as they had on the night Ethan whispered that he was still a man. But everything felt different now. Naomi looked at him and smiled. "Do you remember when you thought you lost yourself?" she asked. Ethan nodded quietly. "I thought my life was defined by what I could do," he replied. "But you showed me that my life was defined by who I was." Naomi held his gaze, knowing those words represented the journey they had shared. Their relationship had never been about one person saving another. It had been about two people learning from each other. Ethan taught Naomi that strength could exist even in silence. Naomi taught Ethan that vulnerability could exist alongside dignity. Together, they discovered that love was not about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who saw the truth beneath everything else. The man who once feared being seen differently no longer worried about the opinions of the world. He knew the people who mattered had already seen him completely. Not the title, not the reputation, not the image, just Ethan. And beside him was Naomi, the woman who never measured him by what he had lost. She measured him by the kindness, courage, and humanity he carried every day. Because in the end, true strength was never about controlling every moment of life. It was about having the courage to continue, the humility to accept love, and the wisdom to understand that a person's greatest value has always been found within.